Hi, this is Kelly Neitlinger. I wanted to talk to you today about health. 70% of Americans are on at least one medicine. 50% of Americans are on two medicines. And 20% are on five medicines or more. I have been medicine free for, since 2011. And prior to that, I was taking a daily medicine a couple of times a day, which was a steroid called Flonase. And actually, when I started reading about long-term effects that can be caused from taking a steroid, I didn't know what to do because I didn't know any other option that I had. I had chronic sinus infections and chronic migraines. I had so many migraines and so many sinus infections that it was at times just one continuous sinus infection and interspersed migraines 4 or 5 times a month that would leave me in a fetal position and debilitated, where I couldn't even drive home from work all in one shot. I would have to lay down and sleep on the floor in a fetal position or on the seat because I was so sick I couldn't drive. So it was affecting my entire life, and I went to the doctor and turned to them for help. I was in my early 20s. I didn't really know much about health. I grew up in a family in the Midwest that was a unique dichotomy. So I was born in 1974, and that was sort of the era where my grandparents had a large garden. My parents still gardened, but we also had these things called TV dinners and processed foods. And so I was kind of coming of age in the processed food age, and I would actually prepare a lot of my own meals because they were simple. We had a microwave. So even though I grew up eating a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables, I also grew up eating terrible processed foods that I had no idea of their origin. So I had a little bit of yin and a little bit of yang in my family. I grew up holding a knife and learning how to butcher white-tailed deer that my family had harvested at the age of 3. It was probably a dull knife, but it was still learning the skills. And I also learned how to write on meat packages of meat that we had harvested sustainably ourselves in my family, and I was labeling those meats for my extended family. I grew up harvesting vegetables that I grew in the garden. Some of my earliest jobs from the time that I was able to be independent and walk by myself out to the garden, I was hired or just charged because I was part of the family to weed and pick the vegetables and fruits that were in season. And then I also learned the value of money by selling those fruits and vegetables at a roadside stand. And I learned a lot of wholesome values from my grandparents, but I also learned how easy it was to prepare processed foods and how economic it was. For example, I had never had real mashed potatoes until one day I went to my grandmother's house and I said to her, "Why are your potatoes so lumpy?" And she laughed and was a bit surprised by my comment. She said, "What do you mean? All mashed potatoes have lumps. That's the real potato." And I said, "Well, my mom's mashed potatoes come out in flakes and she just adds water." Well, I never knew where mashed potatoes came from. And as I got older, I became more and more naturopathic and holistic and organic and wild. And I invited a friend from the city, from Ann Arbor, up to my Upper Peninsula home when I was in my mid-20s, and we were picking wild blueberries. And she's an educated woman. She was so excited to go pick wild blueberries. And I remember her saying on the way there, "How do they grow?" I didn't know what she meant. She thought wild blueberries grew on trees. Now, yeah, that'll probably give you a good laugh, and it kind of caused me to bite my lip because I didn't want to laugh at her, but I realized she just didn't know. And she also didn't know that Michigan is one of the best cranberry producing states in the world as well. So I have spent a lifetime learning, changing my way of thinking, and what I have learned in my 41 plus years is that our government is not out to protect us. Our government protects its own special interest groups. The special interest groups run this country. Special interest groups buy our politicians. That's how they get elected. I've learned that the FDA groups like Monsanto rule the world. And I've learned that we're fed a fallacy. We're fed a lot of bad information. For example, we all have the power to change our diet. We all have the power within us, if we educate ourselves enough, to fight most diseases and ailments that face us here in the United States. For example, heart disease, #1 killer of women, very high up for men. It's preventable if you change your diet. You have to reduce your cholesterol, for one, and a lower HDL is very indicative of good metabolism. And so we can actually lower that by making better choices, reducing the fatty meats that we may be eating, and increasing the whole foods, the organic whole foods that are not genetically modified, that are not doused in pesticides, and also eating wild foods. So I'm going to do a series of videos, not claiming that I know everything about health and diet and holistic treatments, but I'm just going to share with you some things that I have learned in my 41 years. And there's also something in this country, we have this pharmacological push. Pharmaceutical companies are multi-billion-dollar companies, and they were one of only 2 countries, us and New Zealand, that is allowing pharmaceutical companies to directly advertise on television to the consumer. And in a lot of those ads, they perpetuate these fallacies, such as, you can't change your health by diet and exercise alone. Well, guess what, people? That is not true. You can change your overall health by diet and exercise. And when I say diet, I'm not talking about a fad diet. I'm talking about a healthy lifestyle, a changing way of eating organic, whole foods that are real foods, that are not processed, that actually are either grown by yourself or someone else who you can believe in. And by reducing the fatty foods and the processed foods out of our diet. One thing that I also found is, if you actually ask your healthcare provider, and be very frank and very direct, ask them how much nutritional training they received in medical school as a U.S. medical professional, and it will shock you, because most medical professionals that have went to medical school and are practicing in the United States receive no nutritional training, or very little. Actually, you probably have more nutritional training than they do. So we think of them as the end-all, and oftentimes they're pushed by HMOs to only spend up to 10 minutes with us before we're pushed out like fast food back into the system. And they write out a quick script and we move on. And unfortunately, those prescriptions are not helping our health. They might be treating the symptoms, but the problems that kill Americans in the health industry, as far as like heart disease and cancer, those numbers are growing percentage-wise. They're not reducing because people are being prescribed pharmaceuticals. The problem is, it's masking the problem. They're not treating the root, which is our lack of a healthy diet and lack of exercise, but in particular, a healthy diet. Because we're fed things like FDA-approved, force-fed, genetically modified beef that's full of fat, or chickens that can't walk because they're so full of fat. And all of this is fed by the special interest group lobbies in the U.S. government, making this allowable, making holistic movements sometimes illegal if we speak out against Monsanto, or we claim the health benefits of wild foods and herbal medicines and herbal remedies and herbal foods. So I'm going to do a lot of videos about some of the supplements that I take and why I take them. I actually have almost died due to kind of some unknown factor, and I think I might have narrowed it down. I've recently learned that not just is corn Roundup Ready in the United States, which means that it's coated with Roundup, which is a glyphosate, which actually destroys the good bacteria in your belly. And that's why we have to add things to our gut to basically allow those juices to continue to flow the way they should, helping break down bad and good foods in our system. But I also learned that wheat is directly applied with Roundup as a desiccant to dry out the wheat prior to it ending up ground up on your shelves. And I find that appalling and abhorrent. And I also have realized and learned that that often leads to things such as immune deficiencies. Now, when I was in my 20s and I was going through all of this trouble with these chronic migraines and acute migraines and these issues with, sleep deprivation and basically chronically being sick every day of my life and it affecting my entire quality of life, I was consuming at that time in my life a lot of processed foods, including a lot of processed wheat, non-organic processed wheat. So I'll stop it here. It's already at 11 minutes, so I'm not even sure how this will upload, but I will continue this talk on. But I've learned now